Okay, well, good morning, everyone. And yes, my name is Chad Hyatt, I'm a Hoosier down here in the United States of America, in Indiana, and I've lived all over the United States in Las Vegas and in Baltimore, and here in Indianapolis. And so I've had many roles. My PYP journey started out in Las Vegas as a third grade teacher, and with that, that was in 2003. So going into about my 20th year of working in IB with IB schools, and I'm a member of the IB Educator Network, and so been a role with PYP, especially since 2008. And then since the MYP um, next chapter came along, I was certified as a workshop leader with that transition as well. So I just finished yesterday leading the learning workshop, a 3-day virtual workshop with about 25 people, and so then moving into this workshop today, and then next week got 3 days of PYP workshops for the role of physical education. That I'm excited to get. So yes, my summer vacation, but my summer vacation is slam packed with PD. But that's what I love doing. So I'd like to get us started today with just kind of seeing a little bit about, like, where are you from? I know most of you are in Alberta, but what part of Alberta are you in? And if you're, I guess Jody's visiting from overseas and such. So let me know where you're from in the chat while we're getting started here. Okay, I see Calgary, Edmonton, nice. Tamilock, I'd be interested to see where that is. Oh, we got Hong Kong. Love it. Great. Edmonton. All right. Lots of good places. Macau. Wow. And so we're really joining from all over. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge when we think about how we're coming into this conversation today. And so knowing that we are joining together from a range of places, many within your province and here in my state. I wish to acknowledge that many of us might be joining today from lands that were stolen from Indigenous and First Nations people. Please join me in acknowledging this. I personally would like to acknowledge and honor the Miami, Delaware, Shawnee, and Potawatomi people on whose ancestral homelands and resources my community was built. I also recognize that many enslaved and indentured peoples were forced to live and work on these lands that are now called Indiana. And I'd like to just let you take a moment to let that sit in, okay? And just kind of come to terms with that, come and feel that inside you. And just while you sit with that, let's breathe that in and feel that move deep into our soul and our minds today. And go ahead and exhale nice and slow. And let's do that again to completely bring ourselves to be present in this moment. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4. Hold it for 2, 3, 4. And slowly exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And hopefully you're feeling a sense of presence here and appreciation for the journey that has happened to get us here. And so when we start talking about equitable learning environments and what equitable teaching practices, I like to begin thinking about the culture, the Courageous Conversations Compass from Glenn Singleton. And I'm not sure, how many of you are familiar with this, but oftentimes we enter into any of these conversations from a certain perspective. Okay, many of you might be feeling today that you're entering this conversation from an intellectual lens. You're ready to think. You're kind of in your head, right? And then others, you're a part of this organization because of the relational piece, that connection that you get, plus the action that you feel like you're a part of. And so you might be coming at this to space today from that relational ends. We acknowledge that we've all been embedded into this global pandemic, and so even many of us might be coming in from that emotional state. Okay, and probably curious about some of the people on here that you really care about on this call, and whether how they're doing. You want to know how they're feeling today, and how's everything with them. And so you might be coming more from that emotional lens. And then some of you might be coming in from some of that grounding of the moral piece, okay, where you believe in the IB education through and through. It bleeds through your soul, and you know that it is the best education for children and such, and so you might be coming in from that moral piece. But also, all the while, you might be sitting in multiple places, okay, a combination. So you might even be kind of moving towards the center and such of this graphic here. So in the chat, if you could just share with me, where are you entering this conversation from? From which of these directions on the compass are you most centered today? Nice, nice. A lot of thinking, moral belonging, good. That relational piece, yes. A lot of more intellectual, feeling, good. Thank you very much. The believing, yep. Excellent. And so the goal of um, the compass, is that you're going to start to move over time towards the center. And we recognize in our short time today, you may not be able to move totally there today, or you even make any significant moves today or anytime soon. But over time, the goal is to kind of start moving towards the center. And it's okay for us to recognize that everyone is entering from different areas of this compass. And that's a reality for conversations about equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and belonging. I know that after a year of COVID, the popular narrative in the media that teachers are hearing constantly is one of learning loss, right? That our students are going to be behind. They've lost ground. They've lost learning. But some of the other message that's not heard is that we and our colleagues have worked extremely hard this year, harder than we ever have in many cases. And we've moved ourselves outside of our comfort zones on many occasions to accommodate virtual learning, and even move back to face-to-face. And God help us all, the hybrid models where you've had students in face-to-face and virtual as well. And so it has been a year of stories and narratives and realities unlike any other. And I want to talk here for a moment about what's called the ladder of inference. And this is some work out of Peter Singe's work around the fifth discipline, which is a great book and context to explore if you have it. And the idea of the ladder of inferences is that our actions grow out of our beliefs, and that those beliefs grow out of conclusions that we've made based on assumptions and meanings and selected data from the reality, the real experience. Okay. And the mindsets and beliefs that we act on are deeply rooted within us. Okay. And sometimes we'll fight, to the death about those beliefs and such. But we have to recognize that our version of truth is based on our perception of truth. Okay. That there are multiple truths out there, and that even though we're all experiencing this same reality, we're seeing it from a selective lens, and we're selecting data to see the situation from that lens. And sometimes that data that we select is deeply held by our beliefs. Okay, so instead of going back to reality, we go back to what we see about the reality that is informed by those beliefs. And so we end up, again, drawing further assumptions and adding meaning to some of these things, and as we go. And so I want us to be able to keep in mind how our mental models and such um, are affecting kind of our thinking today, as we move through this, and how they may have been affecting our thinking towards equity, and what is more of an equity focused uh, path to teaching and learning. In equity work, it's important that we carefully take what I'd call a critical inquiry stance on the theories that we adhere to, and the practices that we implement, and the systems that we enact in our classrooms and our schools, to help them operate like a well-oiled machine. And from a concrete example of that, we need to critically examine our beliefs, actions, and environments to ensure that a stance of equity is driving each of those. When you think about inequities in your school or in your classroom, in which of these do your worries lie? Do most of your worries lie in the beliefs piece? Do people really believe in equity, and that all humans have that right to an equitable education? Or is it in the beliefs piece, or the action piece, where what are we carrying out? And then, or is it more in that environment piece? Okay, so when you think about inequities in your school, where do your worries lie? Put that in the chat for me. Would you say it's in the beliefs, the actions, or the environments? Yeah, beliefs, actions, environments, and environments, right, Susan? A lot of times it's the systems, right, that we operate under, that do a lot of that hindering. But yeah, I appreciate everyone's honesty. The beliefs, the actions, yeah, and Christian, yeah. It's hard to say, especially if we haven't really taken the time to think about it in some of these terms, and and even as ourselves, we might be making some assumptions here, right? Um, not really being able to get inside the head of our colleagues and such and such. Today, I want to talk to you about agency. Okay, student agency as that tool for equity. Because to me, Agency provides that necessary vehicle to ensure that stance of equity lives within our schools and our classrooms. As such, it's the frame that I'd like to use for our conversation. As we explore agency today, we're going to do a lot of mirror work where we're going to look inside ourselves. Okay. So as teachers, we're going to reflect on our individual beliefs, our own actions, and the environments that we set up in regards to agency. As school leaders, you can also look at the collective beliefs and the actions and the environments in regards to agency in your schools. So right now, I'd like to acknowledge that any conversation about agency must start with the student's constructed image of the self and our constructed image of the child. I use constructed intentionally here in reference to how the ladder of inference, right, from a couple of slides ago, influences that construction. Our beliefs about children can be mired in assumptions, conclusions, additional personal and cultural meaning, as well as selective data about them. And we must acknowledge that in any equity conversation. When we think about that image of the child, we have to recognize that all children are competent and all children are capable. And those words come from the most recent PYP documents, the most recent program to undergo a review. And from that document, here is a quote, and it comes out of the learner document. Go ahead and read it to yourself. And then in the chat, name an aspect of this paragraph that might be impacted by inequities in your schools and classroom. For example, I would say that their self-belief may be impacted by inequities. But what do you notice? Put it in the chat. Yes, sense of identity, sense of community, ownership, yep, initiative. And we know that that sense of community, that sense of identity is paramount from an SEL lens for learning to happen. Okay, if the amygdala is hijacked, right, from threats to our identity, to our sense of relationship with others, we've shut down that prefrontal cortex, which is vital for learning. And so again, we have to make sure that we're creating these types of environments that allow for agency, and start to dismantle some of these systems and practices that are inequitable, that are actually keeping us from developing that sense of agency. So the PYP stance on agency is often reduced to just voice, choice, and ownership. And that's a great starting place when you start thinking about agency. Do students have voice? Do they have the opportunity to make choices? Do they have ownership of their learning? Okay. That's easy to understand. But I think it's often too, it's also oversimplified. I want to expand on your notion of agency today to look at hope as a critical aspect of agency. I want you to look at hope synonymously with agency. Here's a great quote. Here you can see a clear link between agency and hope. Agency is so important to hope. If I have hope, then I recognize and can acknowledge that I have the agency to control my destiny. Without hope, my sense of agency is null. And furthermore, I begin to start to question my own humanity and whether the oppressors of my agency question my humanity as well. And that's the root of hopelessness. And I guarantee that we sometimes see evidence of it in our classrooms and schools. And I guarantee that we, as teachers, have felt it at times this year, where we felt our own sense of agency had been taken away from us or severely limited. So take a moment and just do a quick little reflection. And you can do this in the journal, or you can use the chat, however you want to do it. But what barriers to agency are a part of the reality, in our schools right now? And how do you think we can start to create hope for agency in our schools? Yes, Susan, class size, right? Curriculum requirements. Just take a quick minute there. Jot down any of your thinking right now. Yes, Carla, right? Yeah, yeah. Pressure for exams, pressure from parents and community. Yeah. Nice, nice. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that reflection. So to help us expand on our thinking around agency, I want to go to one we might call the father of agency, Albert Bandura. And in his work in social cognitive theory, he started to define what agency is. And he refers to agency as that capability to influence one's functioning and the course of events by one's actions. That I can have a say in what happens next, right? And how I go about it. And so when I think of agency, I have to come back to Bandura's ideas, because moving beyond that voice, choice, and ownership, he offers us 4 fundamentals of agency. And those ideas, the first one is intentionality. And so this is where, can we set the purpose? Do we see the big picture? Okay. Do we see the strategy to get there? Can we see that 30,000 kilometer viewpoint? Okay. When we look at what's going on, do we see that big picture? But we also need the forethought. Okay. We need to be able to set a goal based on that big picture. We need to be able to envision what success looks like. Okay. Like success criteria and such. And so as an agent of my learning, I want to be able to see the why behind it. And I want to be able to think about how I'm going to go about there and how I'll know when I get there. Okay. And then self-reactiveness. Okay. This is our motivation. Okay. This is that intrinsic motivation and also that skill set to get going. Can I get started on this? I know what's right. I know what needs to be done, but can I get going on it? Okay. And then finally, self-reflectiveness, where I start monitoring. Okay. Can I monitor things myself and adjust along the way? So if you can imagine, our students need to be self-assessors, but also self-adjusters in that process. Okay, when things are not going right, when this strategy isn't working to get me to closer to that vision of success, that forethought, then I need to rethink what I'm doing because it's not working. Okay. And if you think about each of these in terms of your classroom and your own professional goals, or your schools, perhaps the school improvement plans, or whatever the kind of the language that you use there in Alberta for those types of documents that kind of guide you over the year about your big purpose, and does everybody feel like that, a key player in that and is moving in that right direction and has that sense of agency to go ahead and move and to make adjustments. So now, based on Bandura's perspective on agency, what new barriers to agency exist in your school? And how might we overcome these barriers? Again, go ahead, take a moment in your journal or use the chat. But what new barriers are you starting to think about after hearing more about Bandura's perspective on agency? Thank you, Christine. It's great to have you join us, my friend. Thank you, Gabe. Yes, that forethought, right? Can we envision what success is? Can we, know the success criteria for that? Can students know that? Can they be in on the conversation? Yes. Nice. Collaboration. Without collaboration and planning time, we're not all going to be understanding what that big picture is, right? Yeah. Nice, Glenn. Nice. Good. Thank you, Jane. Because that time that we're working with them, we're building up the skills and dispositions that allow them to be more independent and be those agents of their learning. And if we don't have time for that, then so let's go back to that ladder of inference for a deep second. Okay. And so when we think about agency in our schools, what are our deeply rooted mindsets and beliefs about it? And what are our perceptions of truth, our own version of reality? Okay. What has been the selective data that we have selected? What assumptions have we started making? And even from an equity standpoint, those assumptions, how are they creating a sort of blindness to our own implicit biases and perhaps even explicit biases, as well as any prejudicial or racist thoughts and actions? How is our lack of cultural intelligence or situational awareness for it creating deficit mentalities towards students that, one, don't look like us, or that are from, just because they're students? Do we tend to what we term as other than? To build on your thinking, I want to dig into the work of Dr. Duncan Andrade, who's a professor out of San Francisco State. And he identified two types of hope, one being false hope and one being critical hope. And false hope, he talks about being rooted in inequity. Okay, and in this false hope, there's three types. There's optimism. Okay, sounds innocent enough, right? But this is where you really pull in that individualistic mindset. Well, it's up to them to do that. Okay, and it's that pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. It ignores like systemic inequities. It ignores implicit biases and things that are being faced and such. The other type of hope was mythical hope. That there is this false narrative about that we have arrived at an equitable world. Okay, here in the United States, because we've had a black president, that we've arrived at this equitable place now. Okay, in Canada, in any people of color or something have probably have been more. Or even some of the First Nations people are coming into leadership roles. But all this does too is ignore the past truths. Okay, and Duncan Andrade talks about it being like hope on a tightrope. Okay, that but here's the tightrope is what we're making people of color walk on compared to this well-paved path that some of the more dominant identities and such get. But anyone in those marginalized populations that are sustaining with that hope on a tightrope. And we can go beyond race. We can look at sexual orientation here. We can look at religion here. We can all of these different things everywhere. There are people that are centered in our society, and there are people that are marginalized in our society. And often for those marginalized people, we hold this sense of mythical hope. Okay, or this sense of optimism and such. And then the other piece of this is this hope deferred. Okay, and this is where we blame the system. Okay, the district. Okay, the government, and things, or we dream of this collective utopia, or this automatic ascent of children that they're just kind of going to get on an escalator and automatically go up to the middle class or such, and have a good life. But by maintaining these ideals of hope, we often produce chronic stress of accumulating negative stressors and also the few resources we have to cope with it. Okay, and I think as teachers, we've had to deal with a lot of this hope deferred ideas this year with the pandemic. Okay, that that this dream that the teachers are going to be the heroes of our society. They're just going to automatically make it done, but not even take into account the trauma and such that has led to us from the being overworked and literally doing 2, 3, 4 jobs in one just to make virtual learning happen. Okay, but sometimes this is all we have to offer. This type of hope is all we have to offer when we're unwilling to confront the harsh realities of social inequality, especially with our pedagogy or within our environments, like I mentioned earlier. When we are unwilling to cultivate students' control of their destiny, to teach towards that independence, that sense of agency, developing those skills and dispositions that it takes. When we hold on to these false hopes, instead of reflecting and changing teaching in ourselves, we tend to other these indigenous Black people of color. And this is the concept made popular through the work of Lisa Delpit and Bell Hooks. Okay, we identify oppressive classifications for people. There's a superiority group and an inferiority group, a dominant group and a subordinate group. This leads to racism, classism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia, and etc. Okay, and we must recognize that the brain is wired for survival. So not only is the trauma real and the emotions and the impact on the self-image is real, but also bias is a natural process of our brain. Okay, we are wired for survival, so bias has kind of pre-programmed in there, but it's becoming aware of that. And our own amygdala, let alone the amygdala of students, can overreact. But we all have a malleable brain. We can grow it. We can change. We can be aware of our implicit biases, and we can take action based on that new understanding and that realization. So if we go back to that image of the child, this bias and false hope ultimately affects our image of the child. It leads us to actions that suppress agency in our schools and classrooms. We don't necessarily see them worthy of hope and agency, or whether worthy of being seen as human. Our constructed images of children dictate what we think students, particularly those Black, Indigenous students of color, can and cannot do. And my lens for today is I want you to see oppression in education as limiting and suppressing agency. So I know that's a lot to take in. So take a moment right now. What false hopes exist in your school? And how do we start to overcome these? Take again another moment to journal there. And please use the chat if you'd like to start thinking about those questions. Yeah, thank you, Susan and Gabe. And again, we have the opportunity to come out of this pandemic and revolutionize what education looks like. And so as you finish up this school year and you start to engage in some restorative rest over this summer, then how are you going to come out of that? How are you going to come out of that rest with a new lens, with a new sense of hope? All right, go ahead and finish that thought, and let's keep going. So one of the things when we look at the oppression of agency in schools, a lot of it is in our assumptions about what students bring to the classroom with them. Okay. We often devalue the prior knowledge and the experience that they come to the class with. Okay. We will say that they don't have that background knowledge. They don't have those kinds of experiences. Okay. But is that because the way that we are teaching is not valuing the funds of knowledge that Black, Indigenous people of color bring? Okay. Are we really looking at it from a white middle class value lens? Okay. Oftentimes, and we'll get into this, some of the when we engage topically with our students, that lens that limits the amount of background connections students can make. But when we teach from that conceptual lens, that gives you a lot of openings, okay? A lot of different ways to enter into those conversations. Okay. So now to turn the focus on ourselves for a minute and greater society, I want to explore Bandura's another theory of Bandura's, and that's his moral disengagement theory. And with this theory, we can seek out why we don't act more often on our own agency as teachers, and specifically as like white teachers, white middle class teachers, when we know the education being offered might be less than moral or less than the education being offered in schools with predominantly white, wealthy students. And it's also our disengagement with recognizing the agency or humanity of the students we serve. We can feel that it's okay to morally disengage with agency and other parts of our best practices. And that would be kind of going back to one of the comments earlier about, some of the gaps that Carla mentioned, with, we're so worried about the learning loss and such that we're not going to foster that sense of agency in students, even though that's the key thing to being a lifelong learner and all of the missions and visions of our schools. But that's the one thing we will strip away and such, and we'll just assume that that's okay, even though we know that agency is something we must recognize, and it's part of our humanity. And so this disengagement theory of Bandura's gives us an out, okay, from doing this work, from having these conversations. Now let's dig a little deeper in some of the different lenses that Bandura identified for this moral disengagement. One position that Bandura talks about is the behavior locus. Okay, this is where he means the righteous end justifies the harmful means. Okay, the righteous end of they'll thank me later. Okay, I'm preparing them for the real world. Okay, they're going to have a boss that tells them what to do and when to do it, and things like that. I'm getting them all caught up. So next year they'll be on grade level and such. Okay, so if I'm looking at this moral disengagement potentially from that lens, right? Then there's the agency locus. Okay, where you, as the individual, start evading personal accountability for any of that harmful action. You start blaming others or dispersing it widely so that no one bears the responsibility. And again, we use words like they or the district or society or the system, right? When we start to push push it out of, well, that's not in my hands. That's, that's the system, that's the district, and so on and for that. And so we morally disengage with whatever that is. And then there's the outcome locus. Okay. And so this is where things are so far out of sight that no perceived harm has been done. Okay. That, it's no big deal that we've created this learned helplessness that has been built over the years of K-12 education and or earlier or whatever, and it starts showing up in secondary and post-secondary school and such like that. And because we don't see the effects of it there, but this learned helplessness has totally taken over the child's life. Okay, and then the final one is the victim locus. Okay, this is where we exclude those others from the category of humanity. Okay, and we do that by divesting human qualities from them, or giving them animal qualities, attributing the animal qualities to it. Okay, they need it to be this way. They act like animals when I give them any freedom. Okay, those types of thinking are part of some of that victim locus. And what I want to argue with you today is that this is not okay. It's not good enough, and we can do better. And there's research out there that supports it. So thinking from some of those lenses, take another little moment here. How is the agency oppressed in your school, and how might we start to overcome this oppression? Take a moment to journal again. Great question, Susan, right? We are a community. We are there's stakeholders, and we all need to be in on this, right? Oh, yes, right. The schedule. Yep. I only have these kids for 45 minutes. I've got to make sure they know this stuff. Yeah. But even with mandated assessments, we want them to be successful on it. We can't help them during that mandated assessment. So how are we empowering them with the skills and dispositions related to their self-efficacy and their agency in order to be successful on those mandated exams? Yeah. And Jennifer, when we start blaming any of the testing scores or anything on some of those tested subjects like math and literacy, right? And we don't take any ownership of that in the other subjects, right? Yes. Nice. Thank you all. Very honest reflections today. I love it. All right, I want to start talking about some of this research that I kind of alluded to there. And a gentleman, Dr. Russell Quaglia, has done extensive work on voice in schools. He has an institute that has really looked at idea of student voice and collected hundreds of thousands of pieces of data on this. And so here you can say that only about half of the teachers in our schools say that they have any voice in the decision making. Okay. And guess what happens when teachers feel like they have voice? Then they let students also have a voice. Okay. They're 3 times more likely to encourage students to be leaders and make decisions. Again, about half of students believe teachers are willing to learn from them. And only 47%, again, about half of the students say that they have a voice in the decision making at school. But the perception from teachers, okay, they're blind to the lack of voice that they really are giving students. And that could be through a lot of the implicit biases and such. Okay. But we think we're giving them chances to make decisions and chances to share their perspectives. But look at this. When students have a voice, they're 3 times more likely to experience self-worth in school. Okay. To foster that sense of identity in themselves. Okay. That self-belief, that self-efficacy. They're 5 times more likely to be engaged, and they're 5 times more likely to have that sense of purpose. I'm here for a reason. Okay. So that's some of the hope there. Okay. And research shows that hope. So when you think of things like student voice, how do you think that might be used to improve student self-efficacy in your school? If you took time to listen to the kids, to find a means to capture their voice, what effect is that going to have on student self-efficacy or their belief that they can be agents of their learning, the belief that they can be successful at anything that they embark on? What might that look like at your school? Put that in your journal. Put that in the chat. Yeah, better use of time, better use of resources. Nice. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward while you finish up those thoughts. Going back to that ladder of inference, when my actions are oppressing agency, okay, I realize that these actions are driven by my mental models and that I need to walk back down the ladder one step at a time. I need to understand what beliefs about my students are driving my decision making. What conclusions have I drawn that have led me to these beliefs? What assumptions did I make? What personal and cultural meaning, okay, what white middle class values and such meaning have I added to the realities in my classroom that may be leading me to make these assumptions? What data is it that I've been observing from the realities in my classroom? And what data have I not been observing about those realities? And how might this unseen data change the outcomes as I walk back up the ladder? That data from the reality that I'm not aware of, how is that going to then change the meaning I make and the assumptions I draw and the conclusions? Okay. There's a song and talk from Tupac Shakur, okay, that you probably haven't heard for a long time or so. But what he talked about was concrete roses, okay? And when he these roses that grow in this concrete are youth that emerge in defiance of socially toxic environments, which might be toxic communities. It might be the toxic home, might be our toxic school and classroom. Okay. It's not a deficit mindset of their home, but it's a call out of systemic racism, systemic inequities in a society that was intentionally designed and purposed to privilege white middle class people with no accountability and too much counter blame. And so when we start moving beyond this false hope, Dr. Duncan Andrade, as I alluded earlier, identified critical hope as being the opposite. And there's three elements of critical hope: the material hope, Socratic hope, and audacious hope. And when you think about that rose that grew in the concrete, okay, material hope is the cracks in the concrete that allowed that growth to even happen. Okay. The Socratic hope is that journey of the stem and the plant through the concrete. And that audacious hope is that solidarity, okay, of all of the elements coming together, okay, that we are all in this together, us as fellow teachers, us as colleagues, us in partnership with our students and families, okay, to set up the conditions that ultimately turn our concrete into rose gardens. Okay, how are we starting to transform that concrete? And so when we look at the cracks in the concrete, our quality of teaching is the most significant material resource we have to offer the youth. Okay, when we use the best of research to produce student growth across assessment measures, when we use a rigorous pedagogy and it's geared towards social justice with a false binary of either it's going to be about the rigorous pedagogy or the social justice, okay, it needs to be both. It's both culturally relevant education and anti-racist education. It's about connected resources and networks through our MTSS process, our multi-tiered systems of support in our schools. The journey through the cracks. This is our courage to pursue that painful path, okay, through the cracks to reach the surface. Socrates once said that all great undertakings are risky, and what is worthwhile is always difficult. That's why Duncan Andrade named this the Socratic hope. It prioritizes the humanization of students above all else. It's making the self-sacrifices in our own life that we expect of students, walking the talk. Okay, it's part of the reason why we had sleepless nights in times this year. Okay, we're putting the best version of ourselves out there every time we enter the classroom. So I want you, and I'm going to breeze through this little moment of reflection here, but think about, how is critical hope alive and well in your school? Okay, it's not all doom and gloom. Critical hope is there. Okay, where is it, and what's it look like? So now when we start thinking about what is a curriculum designed for agency look like, that equitable curriculum, it's built on the material hope, right? It is about educating for knowledge, understanding, skills, and dispositions. Okay, these give me the transferable tools to do the work and to have the self-efficacy or believe in my own agency. Okay, we tend to, in schools that serve Black, Indigenous, people of color, to focus on knowledge and skills. We don't go deep into the understandings oftentimes. Okay, the fostering of dispositions is really compliance to dispositions that we name. Okay, but we have not really helped foster that. And so all of that transfer, in order for transfer to happen, we need to foster the development of all of those. When we think about culturally responsive pedagogy, some of the work of Zaretta Hammond in her text, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, start moving, focusing our learning, our teaching, moving it towards learning. Okay, are you just teaching, or is the goal of your classroom is it really about the learning happening in your classroom? And what's the comprehensible input there that's necessary? Not just your comprehensible output, but what are the students taking in? And are you allowing them from that constructive lens to construct their own understandings? Okay, that where I can start to feel my self-worth. I have value here. I can sense my agency because I have that. When we think of like collectivism versus individualism, okay, collectivism is those traditions of collaboration. Okay, our brains are wired for connection and interaction. But if students are spending the majority of their time in our classrooms in independent mode, then we are excluding a large population of students that come from more collectivist cultures. Okay, looking at the power of storytelling, okay, as an oral tradition, because of the oral traditions alive in many of those indigenous and students of colors cultures, okay, and how important storytelling has been over time. Our brains evolved for storytelling. They didn't evolve for PowerPoint presentations, right? We've been storytelling for tens of thousands of years. We've been doing PowerPoint for now about 20, right? We learn through the stories. That's what our brain is wired for. When we start teaching, are we engaging at that conceptual level? Are we provoking that engagement that allows me to bring all of my identities to this work, okay, to that context, okay, moving from that topical to that conceptual piece? That helps me with that transfer. But it allows me to bring my identities. I'm a soccer player. I'm a reader. I'm a brother or a sister. I'm a scientist. I'm a child. I might be an employee. How are you allowing me to bring in my knowledge, my background, my experience from all of those identities into this work that we're doing in the classroom? And again, it's about teaching for transfer to embody that idea of constructivism. I can construct my own meaning, okay? And you honor my funds of knowledge, okay, to be able to make these conceptual connections through this, okay? And it helps me transfer, which then I'm not stuck to just the normal 9 to 3 schedule for thinking about this. I can apply it. Okay, and I can apply it in ways that allow me to think about ideas like social justice education, anti-racist teaching, and such. It ultimately breaks down that concrete into rose gardens. And when we teach from a brain-aligned standpoint, okay, there are methods to think about how the brain moves from the idea of input to elaboration and review as it takes in sensory information. Okay. And so there is a process that Zaretta Hammond named called Ignite, Chunk, Chew, and Review. Okay. The Ignite, how am I priming the brain to focus? Okay. Am I letting you in on the objectives or the inquiry question for the day and such? And so getting me focused, and I can come back to that objective and focus area at any point during my lesson when I see kids thinking or brains, kind of daydreaming and such. And then the chunk and chew piece. Okay. Am I putting content into manageable chunks that's not going to overwork the working memory of the brain? Okay. That it can only take in about 5 to 9 bits of information. It's why your social security number is 9 digits long. It's why your phone number is 7 to 10 digits long. It's why all of these systems have been put into place to help you chunk that information. Okay. And then when we look at discipline, okay, recognizing amygdala hijacks, what kind of environment have I set up that might hijack that amygdala, or that might be influenced from childhood trauma, or the trauma that a child has endured within our schools. And then using restorative discipline practices and not just punishment. And then finally, how about bringing in their voice on collaboratively constructing learning outcomes and success criteria? We're not dumbing down things. We're holding them to high standards and expectations still, but we're giving them multiple initial access points. It's developing all of disciplinary and transdisciplinary literacies. It's, giving them multiple ways to demonstrate learning. It's allowing them to think like experts. And it moves us to this idea of kid watching, okay, using formative assessments as integrated and collaborative process, not in an event. Okay, we're doing it with students, not doing them to students. And it helps us develop assessment capable learners by helping them to identify goals and such. And again, move from that self-assess to that self-adjust lens. And I know I've gone over just a bit, but just take a little moment right now. In what way is your curriculum best designed for equity? And what challenges to equity still exist in your curriculum? Take a moment, journal about that. What way is your curriculum designed for equity? And what challenges to this equity still exist in your curriculum? Use your journal, use the chat. Thank you, E or Lee. Jane, yes. What are we doing to help pre-teach some of that vocabulary to make sure that they have access to the content and such that we're teaching? Yeah. Nice, Glenn. Nice. Okay, yeah. Nice, Jane. Great stuff. All right. And to kind of finish this out here, again, we have a chance coming out of this pandemic to reimagine what education looks like, to reimagine what the status quo is in our schools and in our classroom. And how can we look at this idea of agency from this equity lens? And so this final quote here from Dr. Quaglia, go ahead and read it. When you think about audacious hope, man, Dr. Quaglia has given us a call to action here, right? He wants us to unite in regards to student voice and our role as teachers and leaders, and just what the outcomes can do for students' self-worth and their engagement. Okay. If you don't think they're motivated, if you don't think they're engaged, listen to them then. listen to them, seek out opportunities for their agency as to make our schools more equitable. I believe the solidarity, of teaming up with the learner creates that audacious hope that Dr. Andrade really imagined. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope this has been inspirational for you and useful, and gives you again to a lens to think about that restorative rest that you're going to go on for this next the next couple of months in preparation for next month, and you can kind of rise out of this pandemic with this totally revolutionized way of thinking about education.
All right. Thanks again, Chad. That was great. The importance of student agency, I think, is one of the things that I hadn't really thought about in that way. And so I really appreciate that perspective. And thank you so much for everything you do for IB educators and the IB community. And have a great summer.
Thank you again for your time today, and the invitation means the world to me. And again, I'd love to do further work with your organization. So,
thank you.
All right, thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, I'm just going to stop this recording.